welcome back to another episode of the Heroes Veritas Project. I'm your host, Tim Bass, and today we're going to get into a little bit of a deep dive of what it means to be a man. Last week we talked about reclaiming masculinity and kind of where my mind was at in regards to the need for men of moral and high caliber in today's society. And so today I wanted to spend some time talking about what it means to be a man. Now, this is a very complex and subjective statement in regards to men in general. As times change, as societies change, as things come to pass, our viewpoints on what masculinity truly is or what it means to be a man is going to change. It's going to evolve. And it's going to adapt to the needs of that society. However, today, instead of going down the rabbit hole of chasing subjective meanings and viewpoints of what a man is, I'd like to spend most of the time focusing on more objective constructs of what it means to be a man. I'm going to be pulling on specifically a lot of teachings from Jack Donovan. I know some people have different viewpoints on his approach. It is a little bit extreme for a lot of people, but I really love how he articulates the necessities of these four virtues in regards to the amoral, meaning without moral obligation, and the standing of the definition of masculinity without the outside subjectivity of society. So I've read his books several times. It always provides me with an extra layer of enlightenment, if you would, to my own person, to the way I do things, the reasons I do things. And he takes a very objective approach based on biology, history, the social and communal construct of human beings, and how men fit into those societies. And one of the things that I've always liked about the way he addresses it is he realizes, and I believe this is true, that while our technology has exploded in a very, very short time within the last decade to create a community that's very well connected, social media, the internet, music, news, information, as it's perpetuated through society, has increased in speed. It's also not afforded our physiological and biological counterparts to catch up. And so there's a mismatch of how our bodies respond to certain situations and how society views those situations. And what I've noticed, especially as of late, meaning the last 3 to 5 years, is there's been a huge push to chastise humans for not evolving past their biological constructs, for lack of a better term. Men specifically have been put into this place where if we're too quick to anger, or we're too aggressive, or we don't fit into the nice packaged little box of society of playing by their rules, and we are too rough, or we're too vulgar, or we're too boisterous, or we're too confident even. And I've used some negatives in there, but there's also some positives in there that people are just afraid of. Confidence is seen as overbearing. Leadership is being seen as controlling or manipulative. Making a stance or taking a stance is becoming more and more attacking, for lack of a better word. People are seeing it as more of an attack than what it is. Of, I'm a man, this is my position, and I'm allowed to have this position. Instead, it is, I'm a man and I have this position, and it threatens these other groups who don't like that position, and therefore it needs to be stopped, it needs to be contained, it needs to be checked. And so Jack Donovan's books really does a great job of surmising and articulating the kind of the core requirements to consider yourself a man, to really understand why we do the things we do as men, why there's a social communicative structure based around that, good or bad, and how we start to make use of those utilities in a better way. So the four virtues that he really focuses on, and I'm 100% taking this from him, so I am citing his work. So please don't think that I am saying that this is my work in any way, shape, or form. This is just, I align very heavily with what he says. And the first of those four virtues is strength. And of these virtues, strength is the number one most paramount foundational piece to being a man. Now, there's a lot of, there's a lot of different definitions of quote unquote strength within the internet, or whoever keeps the dictionaries, Merriam-Webster, Oxford, etc. And the one that I think applies best here is the capacity to withstand force from an outside pressure. So the ability to withstand. But I think on the flip side of that, I believe strength is also the ability to exert said force, or to exert your will, which is Jack Donovan's way of saying it, to exert your will on another being or object. Now, strength in itself is a complex word, and that's why there's so many definitions, because we've changed the definition over the years to mean different things. Strength is physical, so the ability to lift or exert force, or to apply pressure, or to pick heavy things up. It's mental, the ability to bounce back from something, the ability to go through hardships and continue to function. It is emotional, the ability to go through loss and the ups and downs of life and still keep your head above water. So there's a lot of different definitions of strength, but at the core of it, for us to talk about the foundation of what it means to be a man, strength has got to be paramount. And this goes back to when we were nomadic. This goes back to when we were tribal. This is back when we had small communities and we didn't have the protection and the infrastructure of law and order that we have today. And so if you look at humans the way I look at humans as animals. We are just another species of mammal on this planet, and therefore we are held captive by the same biological constraints that any other animal has. So there are biological functionalities that we have not evolved past. Now, society would say otherwise, but that's where all the rubs happen. That's where all the contention happens, because they're trying to force something that has not physiologically changed because they ideologically want to. So when you look at strength is, first and foremost, in my opinion, your ability to protect yourself and maintain your own survival. If you can't survive, every other virtue, every other ideology, every other concept is nullified right out of the gate. So without strength, without the ability to survive, there is no reason to exist. And in reality, if we didn't have the comforts of our high intellect and built up walls and things that we've done to protect us as a species, we wouldn't survive without strength. Weakness would get quilled out. Darwinism would take effect. It's been witnessed across species across the globe. And the only reason that we do not have that is we are fortunate enough to have an intellect that allows us to create apparatus that will protect us, that allow us to create weaponry and tools that will make sure that we can fend off the largest of beasts and we can leverage physics to our advantage. But strength in itself is the core element to get through life. And earlier I mentioned that there's multiple levels of strength. There's the physical strength. Obviously, I'm talking about fighting something off or protecting yourself or your family. There's the mental strength. We go through hardships every day, especially our service members, our law enforcement. They see the hell and trauma every day. And even people who shouldn't see those things, who don't choose to see those things, there's evil in the world and they have to go through those things. So if you don't have the strength to deal with those demons, face them down every day, and wake up and choose a better life or choose to continue forward, you're just not going to make it. Suicide is an all-time high for that very reason. So strength for me, it wasn't always that paramount for me. The utility of strength, like I said, in our society isn't necessarily there anymore. And what I mean by there is, I mean, the requirement of it isn't there anymore. I used to be 300 pounds. I used to play video games, eat Doritos, hang out on the couch, go and work an IT job where I sat for 8 to 15 hours a day. And I gave no priority to my own health. I gave no priority to my own physical capacity as a man. And therefore, it goes to show that society as a whole has diminished the necessity of strength, because one can thrive, even if that's your definition of thriving, being that you sit on your couch and you do whatever you want and you don't have to work out. That's a thrive for you. That's not my definition of thrive, but society has afforded that luxury. And therefore, strength is no longer a necessity, which in turn brings up a larger picture, which is masculinity is no longer a necessity, because the utility of masculinity, the utility of manliness has been systematically worked out as a necessity because of the luxury of society. And that's something I'm going to cover pretty heavily throughout the longevity of this podcast, because that's kind of the catharsis for, not even the catharsis, that's a wrong word. Catharsis is something different, but that's the impetus behind the whole podcast in itself, is bringing back the necessity and utility of masculinity. So I've experienced strength not being a priority, so I understand what that feels like. But I also understand the flip side of that is there's always that part where in the back of your mind as a man, you realize that there's something you're missing. Especially if you get next to other men who do prioritize strength, if you run in circles who do like I was military, so I was around guys who had the utility for it because they were not in the civilian sector. I was in the civilian sector and they were still active military, and they would make fun of me. They would hold me accountable. They would initiate me as a man because they still had it as a priority and I had gotten soft. So strength is the number one foundational requirement for considering yourself a man. And anybody that tells you otherwise is living a soft life. And I'm going to give you an extreme example of why it's the core foundation. If you require the luxury of society to sustain your ability to call yourself a man, then in my mind, you are not a man. Because society is a construct that can fall tomorrow. That's just the reality. Regimes stand and fall all the time. Society stand and fall all the time. In fact, in science, societies, or rather in history and philosophy, societies have a shelf life. So if you are not a man in the sense of preparing yourself for that shelf life's end, that expiration date, and should that happen tomorrow, do you have the strength, the fortitude, the ability, the capacity to protect you and yours should that occur? Most of us would say no. Most of us have indulged ourselves on the luxury and the ignorance of society having a shelf life. I know I have. But that doesn't change the fact that if it ends tomorrow, would I be ready? That question still is there. So that brings me to the next point. Courage. Now, Jack Donovan speaks of courage in his book as having multi-facets. And I don't want to get too deep into these because I'm actually going to have individual episodes that will dive into each one of these, their importance, their utility, and how to cultivate each and every one of them. But one of the things that really resonated with me when it comes to courage, because I have a different perspective. I grew up very hard. I had a hard life. I went in the military. I had a hard time there. And it affords you a certain perspective that most civilians, most that have indulged in that luxury do not have. And that is courage. And I'm trying to think of the best way to say this, but courage cannot exist without danger. Okay? The reason I say that, and the reason that I make that a point, is because today's society would have you believe courage in the lower sense of that word is choosing to be overweight. They would have you believe courage is choosing, this is a thing that was in pop culture recently, choosing to wear a dress as a man. To me, that's not courage. It's not brave. It's your choice. Now, don't get me wrong. Do I believe that you're putting yourself out there? Yeah, you're putting yourself out there to be judged, but the lack of danger therein robs you of the ability to say it is courageous. Because if you use courage to talk about a man who will wear a dress, or you use courage to talk about a person who pounds donuts and Oreos, then what word do you use for the man willing to run into a fire to save a baby? What word then do you choose to use to describe a man who runs towards gunfire to save thousands of lives? What word do you choose to use then for a soldier who jumps on a grenade to save his platoon? Words have meaning. And because we've become a society who no longer looks at words to have meaning, we look at words to be popular, words to be political, words to have divisive nature, we no longer give words the power and the gravitas that they once had. And so while I don't balk at the idea that somebody has to put themselves out there, and yeah, it might be scary. Would I say terrifying? No, because terrifying has another power altogether. But courage requires danger. Being shunned by society is not dangerous. Being unliked for your opinion is rarely dangerous. Now, that being said, that there's some divisive opinions out there that can be very dangerous. But we've gotten to a point where courage is as easy as waking up in the morning. Oh, you were courageous because you woke up today. Now, there's a place for that. I don't know if courage is the word, but there is a place for that. Of standing in the face of adversity, of standing in the face of a demon or a darkness. But the danger is not there. But that being said, you have to have courage as a man to stand on your values. You have to stand for something or fall for anything. It's an old statement. It's an adage that I've heard many, many times repeated over and over again. Honestly, for dumb reasons. I've heard it used for being body positive, but saying that being overweight is healthy. Well, science proves otherwise. Being overweight is not healthy. You may be confident, you may be enjoying being overweight, but it's not healthy. So to stand on your values and say that it's healthy, that's not the same thing. But to be a man, you first have to be strong, but second, you have to be courageous, because you cannot utilize that strength if you're too scared to make the step. And in one of the books that Jack Donovan brings up, he talks about gameness, and he puts this in the guise of dog fights. And gameness is your willingness to jump back into the fray. Beaten, bloody, destroyed, no hope. Your gameness is your willingness to go back in because you stand for something bigger than yourself. You must win. You must overcome. You must defeat that enemy at all costs. Courage has gameness, and there's a certain level of gameness that's required. Because I'm going to tell you right now, if you're training every day like a lot of these guys on Instagram, to be tactical shooters, to run around, dry fire their pistols as fast as they can, doing multi-directional shooting, but you haven't made the decision in your mind that if a real situation were to occur, and make that decision that you are willing to go to every length possible to go home to your family so that your family can go home. That you may have to take a life to make that happen should evil find your doorstep. If you have not made that choice to be game and willing to do what is necessary to go home, all the training in the world and all the strength in the world is not going to serve you. That is where courage comes in. That's where it's required. And I'm going to get more into that in a later podcast because there's a lot to unpack in courage as well as strength. The third virtue Jack talks about is mastery. And I thought that this was really interesting because in all my reading on masculinity, my own personal experience with masculinity, with being a man, with being around other men, mastery was never won, with the exception of Bushido and in martial arts. That was mentioned as a requirement for being man, for being good at being a man. So mastery is really just committing yourself to a skill or several skills to do the best of your ability. If you're not committing yourself to something that adds value to your tribe, a skill set, back in medieval times, it would be blacksmithing, it would be, I don't even know, to be honest, hunting. There's a lot of different skills that you need to bring to a tribe, leatherworking. In today's world, it's not as necessary to have skills. But again, I always rely on the same statement. I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And this mentality goes along the same realm as I'd rather be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. Or si vis pacem parabellum. If you want peace, prepare for war. It's the same concept. Mastery is about applying yourself to a discipline so that skill set can be used to forward your tribe, to better your tribe, better yourself, better your fellow man. And I'm not talking about the universal fellow man. I mean your perimeter of your fellow man, your proximity. So it was refreshing to hear a philosopher talk about mastery being a requirement of man, because it's true. We hear stories all the time about men who they retire and then they begin to, what's the word I'm looking for? They begin to deteriorate. These are men that are full of life, full of health, full of zeal, running around, doing 5 different things, and then they retire. And within a month to 6 months to a year, they're damn near on their deathbed. Why is that? It's a mindset. They no longer had a path to trek. They no longer had a monster to slay. They no longer had a bone to pick with life. And without that bone to pick, they just deteriorate. They got 1 foot in the grave. So mastery is an absolute necessity to being a man. And the last is honor. Jack Donovan talks about honor. Now, of the 4, this is most likely the most subjective concept of virtue out of all 4. Strength is pretty cut and dry. Courage, while there is a little bit of gray area, is pretty cut and dry. Danger is required. Mastery, pretty cut and dry. You need to dedicate yourself to a discipline of some kind. But honor is an adherence to a standard of conduct. But the standard of conduct is what is subjective. For instance, under Heroes Veritas, my standard of conduct, as I'm going to develop and I'm going to build for our brotherhood, for the audience of Heroes Veritas on how to live their life morally and strong, it's going to be very, very different than the guy who's living with his mom at 35 playing video games and yelling upstairs for her to bring him his dinner. I say that almost, I wish I was saying that ironically, but that's a real use case. That's a real standard of conduct that another man has in this society that we have accepted is okay. So when we talk about honor, it's an adherence to a standard of conduct, but when it comes to being a man, honor comes from other men. It doesn't come from women. A woman cannot initiate a man the same way that a man cannot initiate a woman. Only men can initiate other men, and only women can initiate other women. Why? Because it would be ignorant of a man who is structurally different, biologically and emotionally different, to initiate a creature that he's completely separate from and has no knowledge of how she lives. So honor can only come from the men you choose to hold in high esteem. Now, in order for you to be a man, you have to accept that we are not lone wolves. This is another thing that Jack Donovan brings about that I absolutely love. And this has been brought up on a number of other authors that I've read. And I apologize, I'll probably try and get the names into the description of those other authors, but they escape me right now. I've been reading a lot of Jack Donovan lately and interacting with him lately, so he's at the forefront of my mind. But he mentions this concept that if you look at society as a whole, you look at the archetypes that we idolize now as men, as the masculine man, the diehard, the James Bond, the Jason Bourne. They're these lone wolves, do it on their own, badasses. Now they have strength, they have courage, and they have mastery, but what of their honor? There's no system of honor for them because they have no one. They're in a silo. They have no one to compare their honor against. They have no standard of conduct to compare their honor against. And actually, in today's social climate, I think this is a very important missing piece of our society, is that standard of conduct. Because as it sits today, and I personally came across this when I was on my soapbox about politics, which I talked about being the man who was yelling into the wind. I was trying to speak to the honor of a we, not realizing that there was no we. I had never standardized my honor. I had never standardized my conduct adequately enough to have a we to speak to. Because at the end of the day, their values are different than mine. And this became readily apparent when I was debating the merits of morality with people, and they were confusing morality with legality. My honor is not based on what the law says it is. Because I'm going to tell you right now, if the law tells me I can't feed my family, I'm feeding my family. So my honor to my family, to my tribe, to the people in my circle, supersedes legality. So if I was to compare my honor against these people who believe legality is the way to being an honorable man, then I would be the outlaw and therefore no longer honorable to them. And this mentality for me, I'm used to because I grew up in the hood. If my uncle can't get a job because he's been to the pen, but he's still got 2 babies to feed, but it's illegal to sell cocaine, he's probably going to go sell cocaine because he has access to it. Now, to me, he's a good man because he's taking care of his family. But to somebody who defines good as following the letter of the law, he's now a bad man. So this concept of honor is extremely subjective, and it's about the perimeter that you set on the tribe that you decide on. But nonetheless, the men that you adhere to, the men that you are accountable to, the men that you align yourself to, that are loyal to you and you to them, without holding up the system of an honor within that pack, you cannot ever hope to be a man by the guise of virtues of men. So for me, this is the most not diluted, this is the most concentrated concept of what it means to be a man. without all the subjectivity, without all the fluff. It is amoral. What I mean by amoral is it lacks morality. It does not know good from bad, right from wrong, until you give it that. Strength, courage, mastery, and honor is what is required to be a man. It is the core foundation to be a man. Without that, you cannot build an ideology on top of it. So, as we go through this podcast, you have to compare your current situation against these 4 virtues and decide if A, you have these 4 virtues, and B, what level are you competent in these 4 virtues, and C, whether you have them, don't have them, or have a low degree of them, how do you cultivate them? What steps are you going to take so that you can become the man of your life? Because before you can be the man in a tribe, before you can be the man of somebody else's life, before you can be a leader, before you can serve others, you must first serve yourself. And you must first be able to serve yourself and know that you are doing what's right by your value system before you can compare your value system to others to make sure that they align with you. Again, this is not comprehensive. This is the foundation. These 4 virtues are required to build a life as a man. Without these 4 virtues, you can have no hope of ever looking yourself in the mirror and saying, I'm the best type of man that I can be. Whatever that means for you. Because it's going to be different for different people. You may not be part of my tribe. You may not be what I consider honorable. I may not be what you consider honorable. But you may be a man that I can respect if at the very least I can see those 4 virtues. I can see that you align to strength. I see that you align to courage. I see that you align to mastery. And I see that you align to an honor, maybe not my honor, but to the honor of your peers. There's a quote from a movie, and I quote a lot of movies even though they're fictitious because there's lessons in there, but there's a movie called A Knight's Tale with Heath Ledger. And there's a point in the movie where he's at the stockades for lying about who he is. And the Black Prince of Wales come to him and he says, your men love you. If I knew nothing else, that would be knightly enough. What he meant by that is the love of his men, the respect of his men, is a direct correlation to his nobility as a man. That is what honor is. So I hope you have enjoyed this episode of Heroes Veritas podcast. We're going to build on strength, courage, mastery, and honor in the following subsequent episodes. We're going to open them up. We're going to dive into them. We're going to get more into the subjectivity of them. We're going to build on those 4 virtues. And once we build on those 4 virtues, I'm going to start talking about what it means for my tribe. I'm going to talk about how you develop a value system for your tribe. How to lead from the front, lead by example. We're going to give you the tools to tactically become the man that you want in your life, to become the missing piece in guiding your destiny. Because that's what this is all about. As a man, you take control of your life. You can only control yourself. But once you control yourself, you control the world. Master yourself, master the world. Hope you guys have a strong and honorable day. We'll see you next time on the Heroes Veritas podcast.